Walk into Marcus' apartment and you will not see the kind of things people use to perform success. You will see a paid-off Honda Civic key hanging near the door. You will see a slow cooker on the counter with something plain inside it. You will see a couch that has not recently impressed anyone, a television that did not require a financing plan, and a brokerage account he almost never opens because he increased the automatic contribution last January and then went back to living his life. Walk into Derek's place and the first thing you notice is not poverty. It is friction. A very expensive espresso machine still in the box because work got busy. A pile of returns by the door because ordering is easier than deciding. Parking receipts from the premium lot downtown because the cheaper lot requires a 6-minute walk, and 6 minutes has begun to feel like an insult. 2 alerts on a trading app, a car payment large enough to deserve its own room in the budget. He has been meaning to check the credit card balance. He is not stupid. He is simply a little afraid of the number. These 2 men live in the same city. They hold roughly the same title. Their salaries are close enough that income alone does not explain the outcome. Marcus has hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in his 30s. Derek has a fraction of that and a monthly payment schedule that seems to expand every time he tries to simplify it. The difference is not talent. The difference is not one giant investment insight. The difference is not that Marcus found some secret the rest of the world has hidden under a mattress. The difference is habit. Boring habit, unglamorous habit. Habit so ordinary that most people dismiss it while they search for the dramatic move that will finally change everything. I have spent most of my life studying money, and one of the great ironies of money is that extraordinary outcomes are very often the result of things too dull to sell in a seminar. People want to hear about the one investment that changes their life. They want the stock no one else knows, the sector about to explode, the timing trick, the hidden leverage, the side door into wealth. That is because the public prefers revelation to repetition. Repetition is less exciting. It is also what works. The media, the brokers, the advertisers, the financial entertainers, they all benefit when you believe that your problem is a lack of discovery. If only you knew the right thing. If only you got in at the right time. If only you had better information. That is the lie. For most people, the problem is not that they failed to find the thing. The problem is that they refuse to let the boring things run long enough to become powerful. I have always liked arithmetic because arithmetic does not flatter anyone. It does not care what car you drive, what your title sounds like, or how persuasively you can describe your intentions at dinner. It only cares what happened repeatedly over time. And if you study how ordinary millionaires are actually built, the answer is not terribly romantic. Most did not inherit large sums. Most were not high-flying speculators. Many never made the sort of salary people use to excuse their own lack of progress. They simply did unsexy things for a very long time while the world looked elsewhere for excitement. That is the truth I want to make as plain as possible. Wealth does not usually arrive because you became dramatic. It arrives because you became structurally difficult to exploit. That begins with automation. If you make saving a monthly moral test, you have already made the process too fragile. Willpower is overrated. I have seen disciplined people fail for the simple reason that they require discipline too often. When every paycheck demands a fresh argument between the present and the future, the present wins more than it should. The present is loud, the future is abstract. The future loses those fights unless you rig the rules. That is why I prefer automatic movement. When the money leaves before your brain starts negotiating, a great many bad outcomes never get the chance to happen. A lot of people think this sounds too simple to matter. Simple things matter most because they occur most often. A woman named Grace Groner bought 3 shares of Abbott stock in 1935 for a tiny sum and simply let automatic reinvestment and time do the work. Decades later, those few shares had become millions of dollars. That result did not come from adrenaline. It came from refusing to interrupt a plain process for 75 years. Fay-Felicite, Fay-Turn 83 file, 14 Fay people, like to tell that sort of story as if the miracle was the stock. The miracle was the refusal to interfere. The same principle shows up in retirement data in a way that should embarrass anyone who still thinks discipline alone is the answer. Plans with automatic enrollment reach participation far above plans that make each worker consciously choose. The gap is not small, it is a different life. Over long stretches, the extra saving created by default behavior can translate into hundreds of thousands of dollars. Fay-Felicite, Fay-Turn 83 file 14 Fay-U are not going to out-argue your own human wiring every month forever. So stop trying Make the right decision once. Then force repetition to do the heavy lifting. That is the first habit. The second is less popular because it offends the modern religion of visible upgrades. Drive something paid off and slightly embarrassing. I say slightly embarrassing because if it is a little beneath the image you would like to project, then it is probably doing useful work for your balance sheet. The average new vehicle payment in America has become so absurd that people now describe nearly $800 a month as manageable compared with setting fire to a smaller amount. The monthly number looks tolerable only because the total cost has been stretched over so many years that the owner stops feeling the insult all at once. Fay-Phalocite, Fay-Turn 83, File 14, Fay, a car is transportation. It is not a reputation strategy. It is not a substitute for self-respect. It is not proof that your work matters. The trouble begins when people start using a depreciating machine to communicate stability or importance. Then the car stops being a tool and becomes a story. Stories are expensive. A man paying $700 or $800 a month for years is not merely buying a vehicle. He is donating capital that could have become future freedom. If the same amount had been invested consistently over decades, the end value becomes enormous. The math in the source document makes that point brutally. Translating a typical new car payment into well over $1 million over a long enough horizon. Fay-Phalocite, Fay-Turn 83, File 0 Fay people find this irritating because the car gives immediate pleasure and the investment gives delayed optionality. Immediate pleasure almost always beats delayed optionality in the untutored mind. That is why so many people remain untutored at 50. Ronald Read understood this better than many highly paid professionals. He worked ordinary jobs, drove modestly, lived without display, and died having quietly accumulated millions. The world sees that outcome and thinks there must have been a hidden trick. The trick was that he did not keep converting surplus into objects that made noise. Fay-Phalocite, Fay-Turn 83 File 0 Fay. The third habit is one people laugh at because it sounds too domestic to have serious financial consequences. Cook your food at home. They hear that and roll their eyes. Their parents said it. Their grandparents said it. Fine, arithmetic says it too. A household that eats out habitually is usually doing much more than purchasing meals. It is purchasing convenience at a recurring premium high enough to compound into real damage. Marcus used a slow cooker and groceries. Derek lived on deliveries, restaurant lunches, and the kind of casual spending that never feels like a life decision because it arrives disguised as Tuesday. The monthly difference in the source was nearly $500, and over long spans that turns into a six-figure difference in future wealth. Fay-Phalocite, Fay-Turn 83 File 0 Fay, that is what people miss. They think no single dinner matters. Correct. Single dinners rarely matter. Repeated structure matters enormously. Money is not usually lost one cinematic decision at a time. It is lost through ordinary repetition that never feels important enough to interrupt. The same is true in reverse. No one bowl of rice and slow cooked beans creates a fortune. Thousands of such decisions, while capital compounds elsewhere. The fourth habit is to buy less house than the bank will allow you to buy. This is a sentence that offends almost everyone, because the house is where personal identity, family emotion, aspiration, fear, status, school district anxiety, and the language of adulthood all collide. The bank is not a wise elder. The bank is not asking what level of obligation will leave your nervous system relaxed and your capital formation healthy for 30 years. The bank is asking how much debt it can place on your shoulders without producing an immediate default. Those are different numbers. The gap between them is where people bury their future. I have watched families with fine incomes condemn themselves to years of financial claustrophobia because they bought the best house they could technically carry rather than the very good house that left them room. Room is wealth. A larger kitchen is not wealth if it forces the rest of life into a tight corridor. A more impressive neighborhood is not wealth if one HVAC failure turns a month into a small household emergency. The source document used a beautiful phrase for this, describing the families who bought less house as the ones who could absorb bad news without crisis. That is what financial security actually is. Not an image. Absorption capacity. Fay-Phalocite, Fay-Turn 83 File 14 Fay. Would rather own a slightly smaller life with margin than a larger life financed by my own future anxiety. The fifth habit is to track where the money goes without sentimentality. People say they budget. Often what they mean is that they possess a number they violate and then feel guilty about afterward. That is not budgeting. That is post-game confession. Useful tracking is not about shame. It is about information. If you do not know where the money is going, you cannot make strategic decisions about it. You cannot fix what you refuse to see. The source material describes this perfectly through the little leaks. Nobody thinks of as life, changing, forgotten, subscriptions, convenience fees, bank charges, miscellaneous spending, so ordinary it vanishes into the month without leaving a memory. Fay file a site, Fay turn 83 file, 12 Fay. I am not interested in turning every dollar into a moral confrontation. I am interested in truth. A person who sees his flows clearly can choose. A person who refuses to see them lives by surprise. Surprise is expensive. The sixth habit is one I particularly love because it outsmarts the most common form of self-sabotage. Invest every raise before your lifestyle knows it exists. Most people receive an increase in income and interpret it as permission. A larger apartment, a better parking spot, more frequent lunches out, nicer nonsense, nothing dramatic. Just enough upgrades that within a few months the raise has been metabolized by the lifestyle and forgotten by the balance sheet. That is one of the great wealth killers of the middle class. It is not poverty that destroys the opportunity. It is adaptation. The brain is astonishingly good at turning a new baseline into normal. The source document notes how quickly the pleasant, exceptional thing becomes just another Tuesday. And that is exactly right. Fay file site, Fay turn 83 file 12 Fay. So the raise must be intercepted before the lifestyle receives the memo. That is the rule. If the contribution rate rises before the first larger paycheck lands, the owner hardly notices the difference. But the future does. Marcus did this. Derek did not. The distance between them keeps widening, not because Marcus is joyless, but because he makes sure his increases serve future capital before present appetite. That is a very intelligent order of operations. The seventh habit is the most boring sentence in finance, which is why I trust it more than most exciting ones. Buy low, cost index funds, and then do very little. The public hates that advice because it sounds like giving up the chance to be clever. The professional industry hates it because it eliminates a great many fees, commentaries, and costume changes. I love it because it works for ordinary people with astonishing consistency if they can leave it alone. Trying to outsmart the market is usually where the average investor begins paying tuition. The source notes that investors routinely underperform the very market they own because they trade around it, time it poorly, or feel compelled to do something smarter than simply participate. Fay file site, Fay turn 83 file 12 Fay. I have spent a lifetime studying individual businesses, and even I believe that the average person is usually best served by broad ownership, low cost, and patience. A broad market fund is not glamorous. That is a feature. It allows the owner to stop pretending he must be a prophet. He does not need to know which single company wins every decade. He needs to own the productive engine and keep adding to it. That is the eighth habit too. Really keep enough cash that life cannot force you to sell the engine. An emergency fund does not compound impressively. People say this with disappointment, as if the point of every dollar is maximum return. The point of some dollars is survival. If you have no cash buffer, then every ordinary disruption becomes leverage against your future. A repair bill turns into credit card debt, a medical event becomes an investment liquidation, a layoff becomes panic, a person without reserves is always one event away from turning a long-term plan into a short-term fire. I dislike fire, I prefer insurance. The emergency reserve is insurance for your future self against the stupidity of selling productive assets or taking high-interest debt because life had the bad manners to happen unexpectedly. The ninth habit is to ignore every exciting financial opportunity that arrives already wrapped in enthusiasm. This is one of the oldest rules in the world, and people keep forgetting it because other people, as gains, are hypnotic. The coworker who found a coin, the cousin who joined a deal, the acquaintance who discovered a syndication, the stranger on the internet promising a path around ordinary work, the friend who sounds unusually certain about something he did not understand 6 months ago. All of these opportunities share one quality. They are brought to you with excitement rather than quietly discovered through your own understanding. That is a warning label. The source describes day trading, MLMs, and other flashy opportunities as statistical graveyards. And I think that is putting it generously. Fay Felicite Fay turn 83 file, 14 Fay the wealthy, usually do not become wealthy by saying yes to everything that feels urgent. They become wealthy by refusing most of what is trying to recruit them away from slow productive ownership. I do not need every opportunity. I need the ones that compound, the ones I understand, and the ones that do not rely on other people's urgency to sound convincing. The 10th habit is almost comically simple, which again is why it works. Sleep on major purchases. Not forever. Not out of fear. Just long enough for desire to reveal whether it is real or merely acute. Most urges are acute. They flare brightly and then die if given even mild friction. The source quantified this beautifully, showing how much impulse fades in as little as 72 hours and how much money can be preserved, simply by refusing to let desire and purchase occupy the same hour. Fay Phalocite Fay Turn 83 File 4 Fay I like timers because they reduce the need to become a moral hero. You do not need to say no forever. You need only say not yet. That is often enough for truth to return. What I admire about Marcus is not that he lives like a monk. He does not. He simply made a collection of dull structural decisions that protect margin. And margin is what all of this is really about, not cheapness, not denial, not proving moral superiority through plain food and old vehicles. Margin, the ability to absorb life without turning every inconvenience into catastrophe. That is the secret. When something goes wrong for Marcus, it is annoying. When something goes wrong for Derek, it is destabilizing. That difference is what wealth eventually buys before it buys anything else. It buys resilience. Then later it buys options. The option to leave bad work. The option to say no. The option to rest. The option to retire before your body votes against your plan. That is what the boring habits are really building. Not a number for bragging rights. A life with room in it. Room is one of the rarest luxuries in America. Most people have consumed it in exchange for symbols that require constant maintenance. That is why the median retirement balances look so bleak compared with what people say they need. The source points out that the typical savings for older Americans are nowhere near what most believe retirement requires. And that gap is not caused only by low earnings. It is caused by decades of leakage. Fay Phalocite Fay Turn 83 File 4 Fay. And leakage is such a good word here. A person can go through a month where nothing dramatic goes wrong and still arrive at the end wondering why the account seems smaller than logic suggested it should be. That is not mystery. That is untracked friction. That is convenience purchased on repeat. That is lifestyle letting every raise disappear. That is the premium parking lot, the finance vehicle, the subscriptions, the food bought outside the house, the unchecked impulse purchases, the uninvested employer match, the missed automatic increase, the inability to leave the broad index fund alone. No one item explains the gap. The repeated structure explains the gap. That is why these habits matter. A lot of people hear advice like this and react with irritation because they have heard some version of it before. Good. The fact that it is old does not make it weak. Gravity is old too. I care much less whether an idea is new than whether it is true. These ideas have survived because they are true. What is new is the scale of the machinery designed to make the opposite feel rational. New loans, new subscriptions, new conveniences, new digital temptations, new forms of frictionless consumption, new narratives about treating yourself, rewarding yourself, signaling yourself, expressing yourself. The system is not neutral. It benefits when your money leaks. That means your structure must be stronger than your environment. Marcus has a structure. Derek has impulses plus reactions plus a title plus a salary that once seemed adequate and now feels like it vanishes through vents. He cannot quite locate. I do not dislike Derek. He is not weak. He is ordinary. That is what makes his example important. Most financial failure in the middle class is not loud enough to look like failure while it is happening. It is just an accumulation of reasonable seeming choices made in the wrong order for long enough that compounding starts working against the owner instead of for him. That is why I prefer these 10 habits to all the flashy alternatives. They reverse the direction of compounding. That is the whole battle. Make time, automation, and repetition work for you instead of for banks, lenders, dealers, subscription sellers, app designers, and everyone else trying to harvest your future one manageable payment at a time. A person does not need to become perfect to win this battle. He needs only to stop waiting for an exciting solution and begin respecting the boring one. One automated transfer, one paid-off car, one smaller house than the bank said was possible, one home. Cooked meal replacing one bought out. One raise intercepted before lifestyle expanded. One low cost index fund contribution that would have been turned into a market prediction under another mindset. One emergency reserve transfer, one ignored pitch, one purchase delayed long enough to die on its own. That is how fortunes are built quietly. You do not need applause for this. In fact, it helps if nobody is impressed. The less social reward your spending decisions demand, the easier it becomes to leave capital alone long enough for the extraordinary result to appear. Grace Groner did not need applause. Ronald Read did not need applause. They let boring run long enough to become extraordinary. That phrase from the source is exactly right, and I wish more people understood how much wisdom sits inside it. Fay file site Fay turn 83 file for Fay, because wealth is not usually created by a dramatic leap away from ordinary life. It is created by making ordinary life slightly more efficient, slightly more intentional, slightly less leaky, and then refusing to interrupt the compounding by demanding excitement every 6 weeks. This is one reason I have always distrusted the culture of urgency around money. Urgency sells. Urgency entertains. Urgency almost never compounds as well as patience. If you are waiting for the thrilling version of wealth building, you may wait forever. The thrilling version is a sales product. The real version is a process, and processes work best when they are plain enough to survive your boredom. That is what Marcus built. That is what Derek did not build. And the gap between them, which at first looked almost trivial, is now wide enough to feel like destiny. It is not destiny. It is accumulation. Accumulation of habits, of margin of silence, of capital, of decisions that did not beg for admiration. That kind of accumulation is available to more people than they think. But it asks for one thing. Modern culture hates giving time. Time without interruption. Time without constant self-reinvention. Time without switching from one philosophy to another because something shinier passed by on a screen. That is the hard part. Not genius, not access, not some mystical piece of financial information. Time protected by structure. If you can build that, the rest becomes far more ordinary than the public wants to hear. And that is exactly why it works.